Hi, I'm Ezra Boggs, and even Christians watch The Atheist Edge.
Hey guys. So I'm Courtney, and a lot of you I don't know. I've seen a lot of familiar faces though. So I am one of the hosts of Atheist Edge. I'm also president of a local atheist group, Metroplex Atheists, in Arlington. We got cars going. And I'm also another host on Women of Deconversion. It's a group of atheist YouTubing women who have gotten together from across the U.S. and Canada to have conversations online. And these are all non-believers, and it's a really fun time, and it's a really nuanced conversations that we get into. And they're live on YouTube, first Monday of every month at around 8 p.m. Central Time on Secular Hangouts. It's a really good talk. And my degree's in psychology, so a lot of what I talk about is around psychology. So we engage with believers in a lot of different ways. I've engaged with believers in different ways than Jim or TJ has. But one thing we did with Metroplex Atheists is we did an Ask an Atheist event at a church. We've done that a couple of times. That's on YouTube as well. And I might talk about it a little later. It's a really interesting time to actually sit and do an Ask an Atheist event with believers in their church and have them kind of like come at you with questions. And it's a fun time. And then we did a protest of Pastor Jeffress really shortly. He did, yes, he's an asshole, but also we did a protest of a sermon he was giving called "America is a Christian Nation," which he did a billboard campaign about, and we heard about it, and so we decided to go not protest his right to say what he wants at his own pulpit, because I think all of us would agree that his religious freedom is very important. But we do also have the right to stand next to him and say, hey, this is divisive and dangerous and incorrect, because you're calling anyone who steps outside of his narrow definition of Christianity not American, and that can be dangerous for people. And then I also was a person that was invited for Truth Wanted down in Austin. That's a newer show that's in the studios of Atheist Experience, so I got to meet that whole crew, and what is that called? The Austin?
ACA.
Yeah.
Atheist Community
of Austin. They invited me down to do that, and that was really fun. Which is another way that I've engaged with believers, because that was a radio call-in show, just like Atheist Experience, and so we got to engage with some believers. And if you ever get to see that interview, it's really funny. There's some crazy things that people say, and my reaction is not held back. It's really bad. And then we also did some interviews with CNN because of the Jeffress protest. And I also, after that, I did some Christian radio interviews by phone, which was really fun. And again, it's like a Christian radio show, and so yeah, you're representing atheism among people who have never even heard the term, or they've heard it in a really, really negative way. So you do have to be aware of that. And so we also have Atheist Christian Book Club. I know it's a lot of stuff going on, but it's every month we get together and you either read a book from an atheist perspective or a Christian perspective. We alternate them.
I want to say this month it's from an atheist perspective.
Probably, yeah. And last month we had Frank Turek.
It's the first Friday of every month, and John Loftus is on May 3rd is the next one.
So we recently, what's interesting about that is it's one of the only book clubs like it. People haven't really heard of something where Christians and atheists get together and have these conversations with each other about these topics, and they're willing to engage in civil dialogue about those things. And like read books from the opposite perspective. That's a big deal. And what's also cool is they actually get contact with the authors of these books every month. And so they either come into the studio, and we're able, or not studio, into the James's house, and we do record those, so it's like a studio. And so yeah, you get to either meet them or hear what they have to say through Skype, and usually it's a really great talk. And then lastly, Atheist Edge, we have had Christians come through, and trial by fire into the lion's den of atheism. It's really a good time, because yeah, you're also giving them a platform, because they're in their journey wherever they're going. They don't have to be agreeing with us or going toward the place that we're at, but it's important to give them the voice that we have. It's the same thing. So why do we do it? Because a lot of people would call it a waste of time to go into a church and say, this is what atheism is. And so I hear that a lot. Does anybody feel that way? Like,
No.
Why go to a church and talk to Christians about atheism? Raise your hand, maybe.
I agree.
It's a very valid question, because it's like, you're shouting to avoid. Like, who cares about what atheists think if you're not an atheist?
I mean, on a certain level, it's one going and saying, we are not goblins, the caricature that TJ has.
Yeah, so I'm going to get into it, though, too.
Yeah.
So this is why we do it. Oh, go ahead.
So I was going to say, why rob the bank? Because that's where the money is?
Yeah.
So,
Indeed. Oh, that's true. I guess that's where
just go to the church
that's where the converts are. Yeah.
Reach.
So we've done a lot of all these different events, and we've learned a lot. But this is the major reasons that we do it. So for one, you're breaking that stigma, what you were talking about, of what an atheist is. Because if Christians haven't engaged with atheists at all, then they have no context for who you are and what that means and what's important to you, that kind of humanity. And the next, you've got personalizing and normalizing atheism. So like TJ was saying, they don't know that we're out there, that we're, a big part of the population, and that it isn't just like huge big deal. Yeah.
You said you're saying Christian, but I know that we also have had discussions with Muslims along the way.
At MA, yeah. Not going into a mosque though. Not so far, but we would. A little bit of sweat on our palms, yeah. And so the next one, if you stay quiet, others control who you are. So, or at least the perception of who you are. So yeah, we've heard these sermons that are given by preachers of what atheism is, that we're lost, that we actually believe in God, but we're angry at Him, or that we're like eating babies. What's some other things that you guys have heard about?
I've gotten who hurt you, but seriously,
What church did you go to?
Yeah, thinking that like religion was harmful to you in some way, right? And that wasn't my experience.
It was kind of crazy, but it's like, oh, glad it's over.
I mean,
it
wasn't hurtful until like I actually started leaving.
Right. Well, and or you may not have been a true believer. They think that too, And so there's a lot of stigmas around, or beliefs around, what atheism is, and if we present ourselves and tell what our story is and our journey on that path, then that can really normalize, personalize it, but also just give an accurate depiction of at least one person and their journey and what we think about.
So you're saying we're not all Kevin Sorbo from God's Mouth?
We all want to be. So we've got... No, not at all. That's a joke. So the next one, encouraging critical thinking. So some of these concepts of like looking at things in a different way is... I don't know if this happened for you guys, but for me, when I became an atheist, my perspective really shifted a lot, and the way that I approached things and the way that I thought about things was very different. And I hadn't really come across the idea of critical thinking until early college, which was when I deconverted, and that was a large part of the reason that I did. And so it can be really great to introduce people to that, and to be the person that can show them at least looking at things in a more productive way and thinking about things in a more scientific view. And then establishing mutual understanding. The reason we do Atheist and Christian Book Club is we're not there to convert each other, we're there to understand each other. And as soon as you take that hostility and that arrogance out of the equation, all you're doing is having a conversation to understand each other, and that brings their guard down, and you can actually see where you really disagree, because a lot of the time we agree on more than we would think. And then being out and open gives a voice to those who can't be. So there's a lot of people who are closet atheists, people who live in a place that they'd get kicked out of their house if they were open about being atheist, or they might be killed in a certain country or something. And so there are a lot of people who don't have the voice that we have, that don't have the platform that we have, or the freedom to be out and open. And I personally would never criticize someone for not being completely out when they're not ready to be. And because that's a very personal choice and there's a lot going into that, and so it's really important to respect people's decision to not be out. But when you are, it is important to be aware that that is a privilege that a lot of people don't have, and so using the platform to be the voice that other people can't be can be really, really rewarding.
Well, and on that point, when you go into those churches, there are certainly atheists in that church.
Yeah.
That are, that are husbands or wives or for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I stayed
some preachers.
Even after I converted, I stayed
preachers
in
preachers
are atheists. Greater good.
2 to 3 years, just because it was the only way that I could get community.
Yeah. Yeah. So and the thing that I've recently talked about with people a little bit is to recognize that. This might be a tangent, but people have
comment over here.
Yeah, okay.
Someone else had their hand up.
But just that people value different things, and so when I deconverted, my belief changed largely because I started to value what was actually true versus what was important to me about my faith. And some people, whether it's true or not, isn't really important to them, and so it is important when you're engaging with believers that they may have a very different idea of what religion means to them and what they value, and so yeah, so some people may cling to their religion for cultural reasons or sense of community, and so it's important to recognize that just because you value a certain thing in a certain way, it doesn't mean that they'll look at it the same way or value it in the same way. Do we have another question? No? Okay. Yeah, and then lastly, it makes non-believers and questioning believers not feel alone, like what you were saying of this idea of there are people out there that are questioning quietly, and you give them the voice to start to think about these things and feel like they're not alone. Because when I was a non-believer at first, I thought I was the only person ever, because I didn't realize there was a whole community and books and speakers and everything, that I had no idea that this was even a thing that people thought about. And so I just deconverted for my own personal reasons without any arguments around me, and it wasn't until later that I was embraced by this entire community. So yeah, so you may be the first person that they've ever met that thinks this way, and they may realize they have a lot in common with you. Do we have another question? Yeah.
I live in a complex for seniors, and everybody there is very into religion. They have their prayer meetings, they have their Bible studies. I'm afraid to speak up and say I'm atheist.
Yeah.
I don't know if it would, take me out and flog me or what.
Yeah, I mean, I think coming out as an atheist with different people, you're always coming out in a new way. You're always coming out to more people the more you have that conversation. And it's really up to you to feel out how comfortable you are revealing that to certain people. And sometimes it's just not worth it. Sometimes it doesn't matter that you disagree, because you have things that other things that you agree on, and it might just create a wedge between the two of you that doesn't work. But at the same time, if you do feel comfortable, it is encouraging to know that being an out atheist, you are changing the stigma that it's rare, that it's weird, that there are a lot of attributes about you that aren't true. So when we did the Ask an Atheist event at the church, I had a woman come up to me at the end, and she looked at me and she said, "I never would have thought you'd be one of the atheists, because I'm nice and female and young, and it's yeah, and I wasn't harmed. I didn't feel harmed by religion. I went through my whole a little introduction of how I deconverted, and I was happy in my religion. And so all of these things, I'm talking to Christians, and I'm like, I've been where you are happily, and this is what happened to lead me away from that. And so it was really shocking for them, because they're used to the idea of atheism be what the churches really talk about, and within that bubble, that's all they're going to see, unless you come out and say, this is another example of what atheism means. So in all of those things, what else have we learned? And I'm going to try to go through these pretty quickly. We've learned that it really isn't easy to engage with believers. Things get heated. People have these beliefs as a part of their identity. They hold these things really close to their chest. And so you want to make sure that they know that you're separating a criticism of an idea from a criticism of them as a person. And that's really difficult to do because a lot of times people will hold that as part of their identity. So you want to really be careful about your language and try to make it clear to them that you're not criticizing the person and calling them stupid, because that's a big stigma about atheism that we're trying to change. Yeah.
I was harkening back to what TJ was going and talking about.
Right.
Holding yourself. Would you say that because they're not having the talks that we're having now, you really should remain calm, you really should remain civil, that they have the tendency to become uncivil?
Oh yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've done a couple of different Ask an Atheist events, and the second one we did, TJ and I did this, or not TJ, sorry, Jim and I did that. Jim and I were part of an Ask an Atheist event, and it got a little heated. And that's on YouTube, you can watch it. It's fun. Somebody like screamed that's a cop-out to me when I said that their dismissal of evolution they may not understand it fully. So it's all I could say. You know, it's this older gentleman that's in a church. I'm sure he's believed this for his entire life, and he was like, well, I looked into that, and that's a stupid argument. So he was like dismissing what I was talking about, and I was like, you may not understand it fully. It's fine. But, I mean, it sounded kind of rude, but
it's true.
I'm nice,
But I mean, at the exact same time, you can't fully understand everything.
Absolutely. Well, and I'm going to get to this in a second. Like, none of us are an expert in everything, and so there are times where you have to say that you don't know as much as they would like you to, or they would expect you to, the believers would expect you to about these things. So things can get heated, and like TJ was saying, you want to maintain your composure even if they're not, and if they can't keep their calm or you can't keep your calm, you can walk away from the conversation and revisit it, or not at all. And then also stay on topic, because a lot of the time people haven't heard these arguments ever, and so they start getting a little frantic and like, well, what about this, and what about that, and what about that, and what about that, and they go off on these tangents, and you want to try to bring them back to, okay, you want to talk about the age of the earth, you want to talk about evolution, you want to talk about Bible contradictions. Like, there's a lot of different things you can talk about with people about why you came to the conclusion that you came to, if that's what you're talking about. And so it's important to stay on one topic, as I'm sure all of you know already. And then, be patient, because it's a big, difficult thing to talk to people about their innermost beliefs that have never been challenged for their entire life a lot of the time. And so we're really used to having these conversations where we've heard their argument possibly 1,000,000 times, and we've given the response that we know because we're practiced at it by now. But there are a lot of people who have never heard your argument or never had to think about these things at all. So their response to you is classic and overdone, and it can be annoying to sit there and listen to them just drone on about the watchmaker fallacy or whatever. And so it's just like, come on, so you have to be really patient with them, because they've a lot of the time never heard these arguments, and so you're a brand new face, you're representing atheism, and it's tough, but it's important. And yeah, again, like, try not to rush through these, because they may not have ever heard this argument before. And that's really crazy to think about, because if this is a hobby of yours and you're like listening to Hitchens and listening to Sam Harris, and you've thought about these things for a long time, they're coming to this for the first time and they may not have ever heard this. So you don't want to rush through the ideas that you're presenting, because as if they've heard it 1,000,000 times the way that you have. Yes?
Courtney, I've been in front of many people of religious belief for a lot of years. And time after time, we can't even get to questions or anything that's sort of substantive. They spend their time looking at me and saying, well, you're not really an atheist. You can't be.
Yeah.
And they start clipping and trimming your image to fit their idea of what an atheist would be, and pretty soon it doesn't fit. And they you never get, how do you get past that? You've got any magic answers?
Well, I think, well, people talk about there being no silver bullet. That's a little bit more about what's going to convince you that you're wrong kind of thing, and that's ridiculous, because it takes a long time for people to deconvert. But when you are just trying to clarify what your position is on something, or clarify who you are as an atheist and how it is separate from the stigma that they have in their head, it's just important to be really patient and open and honest with them about the reason behind the arguments that you have, and make it really personal. Because if you are really calm and collected, and I just have a conversation with people. If I'm in a coffee shop and somebody sees that I'm reading Christopher Hitchens, they'll stop me and like, what is that? And you know, they're probably going to Gateway, and so there's a coffee shop right by Gateway Church, and it's full of Gateway people, and I'm just like, ooh, yay, because it's fun, because you know, you get to have these really interesting conversations, and I'll sit there for an hour with them, and talk about whatever they want to talk about. You let them lead the conversation a lot of the time, because there's a lot of things that you can get into, but until you get to what they think and how they're possibly incorrect about who you are and what your argument is, then you may just talk past each other, and that's not good either. So yeah, be yourself and be personable, because if you make it personal and make it about your personal journey and your story, it's much more believable. They may not think that you're just trying to, you know, represent the devil.
Well, speaking of the devil, my biggest frustration is, like, as atheistic Satanists, we don't even get a voice.
Yeah.
Like, you talk to a Christian and their very first thought is they worship the devil. I don't even want to be around them. Like, I'm going to throw holy water at them.
Yeah.
So, like, we don't even get a voice in the community, and that's super frustrating. Like,
yeah, well, I
how do
guess...
you start conversations with Christians.
So I actually have some tactics where you actually throw in some Satan verbiage, and then it actually does start a conversation. Well, whoa, you can't mean that. Somebody sees Chanel brush. What's that? That's real quick. I don't read anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the person, and I think if you come at it in a soft way of making it personal and talking about what you're passionate about and what you care about, you know, a lot of the times atheism is characterized as a lack of belief, and that's it. Like, you know, you don't believe in anything, so why do you have a group? Why do you even talk about this? Why do you have a YouTube channel?
That's literally what I had to deal with whenever I was going and I was doing stuff with the business school at UTA.
Yeah.
Like, I go and I mention, oh, I've got to go off and do something for the Maverick Secular Society. What's that? Well, it's the atheist group on campus.
Right.
And then all of a sudden I get laughter in my face. Why do you even need to have a group?
Yeah, well, a lot of the time I think when I drop the atheism label, I really love doing that, because it's normalizing it. You know, it's just like, yeah, this is what we think, and we're nice people, and it's fine. And so, yeah, dropping the atheist label, I think a lot of the time what I start with is clarifying what that means and clarifying what it doesn't mean, because a lot of the time it can make people think that it's like, well, there is no God 100% certainty and no one can change my mind. Like, that's not at all what that is. Did you have a question?
My thought on patience is the hard part, because cosmos has been aired, cosmos has been remade and aired.
Yeah.
It's on its way to a second season, and that's on Fox.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, but let's ignore education. Let's ignore school. So being patient with people who have been taught.
Yeah.
Now that they are just willfully ignorant, that's hard for me, and that's my issue.
Definitely. Well, you know, I think, again, once you start getting into the atheist circles, you hear these arguments for the first time. So there's a lot of things that atheists talk about and think about, and this is part of our world, and it's almost like an echo chamber where these are things that we're interested in with debate and ideas and critical thinking. But outside of that world, a lot of people have never heard anything like this. They've never seen a talk like this, or they've never thought about these ideas. And so it's really important to remember, again, that even if it seems accessible to everybody, there's a large subset of the population that's never seen Cosmos, never heard of any of this. And so, especially if you're going into, especially if Star Trek is great. But especially if you're going into churches with, you know, a large subset of people that is in this kind of Christian bubble, and there's a lot of that cognitive dissonance happening where, you know, you have this idea that you're critical, you use critical thinking for every area except your belief, and so that's an issue as well. And so, yeah.
I mean, there's also some compartmentalization, because I do know.
Cognitive dissonance.
I know several Christians who do take critical thinking, and they think very critically about their faith, but somehow there's a wall between their faith and everything else.
Yeah, there is that group in our Atheist Christian book club of like, we're going to be critical thinking about our Christianity, and those people scare me.
It's why I left the church, so it works.
Yeah. So the biggest advice that I would give definitely is staying within your expertise. So if there's something you don't know, don't be afraid to say that you don't know. And it's a really fun conversation to have with people who are religious, because they're like, well, you know, what about this and what about that and what about that? And if you don't know those things, it's incredibly useful to teach them how to say I don't know. Because, or to let them know that, hey, you know, just because your religion has an answer for this doesn't mean there actually is one. It doesn't mean that their answer is correct. And so that's the biggest thing that I've talked to about atheism with atheists, Ask an Atheist events, because again, they've never heard that idea of like, well, Christianity has an answer, there must be an answer. And so if you don't believe in Christianity, what's your answer? And we don't always have one, but that's something that is an actual power to us, of we are constantly searching for the truth instead of coming up with an answer and calling it the truth, because that's something that they've never heard of. And then remembering that you're not trying to convert them. This is kind of a controversial one, but for me, the biggest like standoff comes when they think that you're trying to convert them to atheism. And if you disarm them with just trying to understand their perspective and have them understand yours and engage in a civil dialogue and just see where you disagree, that's a much more productive conversation than trying to convince them that they're wrong. And I think even our group disagrees with that. But I mean, that's how I think. Yeah.
But I mean, the thing is that especially whenever you're going and you're dealing with such deeply held beliefs,
yeah.
Doesn't matter what the belief is. Like it can be animals have souls.
Yeah.
If you really deeply hold that belief, I cannot go and come up to you and give you all of the science behind souls don't actually exist. You have to go and you have to like think through it yourself.
Right. Yeah. So engaging in a dialogue, and especially with that, asking them questions.
Yeah.
Because if they're coming up with the answers, then they're going to get to the end of what their conclusions are, and sometimes it's not very logical. Yes. We had a question in the back. Yeah.
I think you have to keep in mind that Christian people believe what they believe because they really want to believe it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want it to be challenged.
Right. Yeah, and so showing up and showing that you are comfortable with uncertainty, that's such a good example of a way to think critically in all areas of your life. And if you walk away from that conversation and they're not agreeing with you, for one thing, that's never going to happen overnight. So there's never going to be a person who's a diehard believer and says, well, now I'm an atheist. You know, sometimes people talk about that, of it being like a split-second decision, but it usually comes from them. It comes from within them. But there are never arguments where like you are engaging with someone and they completely come to your side. And so remembering that deconversion is a really slow process, and even if they never agree with you, the fact that you had that conversation and that connection with them as a person, that's a much more important thing to me than them agreeing with you. Yeah. And now for Jim.